Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today is Wednesday, September 7th, and the time is 3:02. We are here for the purpose of a briefing meeting today, and the only item on the agenda is the 2022-2023 School District of Lee County Uniform Assessment Calendar, and our presenter today is Dr. Matthew Kay. Welcome, Dr. Kay.
Good afternoon. Is the microphone working? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, board members. The purpose of this briefing is to present the proposed 2022-2023 School District of Lee County Uniform Assessment Calendar in advance of a board action item on September 20th to satisfy compliance with Florida Statute 1008.22, Student Assessment Program for Public Schools. The agenda for this briefing is presented here on slide 2. In this briefing, I'll present the context of assessment and accountability for this school year, the timeline of the item, the composition of the calendar, the types of assessments that must be included in the calendar, our next steps, and then conclude with superintendent's comments and board member questions. The 2022-2023 Uniform Assessment Calendar falls within the context of the new statewide progress monitoring program initiated this year. Most accountability measures that impact schools and districts will still be reported, and student-level requirements related to assessments such as promotion, graduation, and retention are still in place for this school year. So while the assessments may be new, the expectations for our students and schools remain high. This does also represent a transitional year for districts throughout Florida as we learn more about the system and the reporting details that can be used to drive instruction. We have already begun the first progress monitoring window of the Florida Assessment of Student Thinking, or FAST, and all districts are expected to conclude this first window statewide by September 30th. The second progress monitoring window, administered mid-year, is also for informational purposes, and the third window, administered at the end of the school year, will be used for accountability purposes. There are several things we know so far related to the FAST progress monitoring. We know there will be 3 assessment windows throughout the school year, as previously mentioned, that there will be reporting in terms of student achievement levels and scale scores, and that there is an indication of the student's proficiency within the reporting categories that are made up of a collection of standards and benchmarks. We are still learning more about how these data can be used to better understand student progress towards specific benchmarks. This level of detail is something the state has reported as an ongoing effort, and now in the middle of the first window of assessment is something we are continuing to investigate. Slide 5 demonstrates an example of a teacher's classroom level report. Student names from this example have been redacted and replaced with generic titles such as Student A. On this report, teachers can see that Student A, a 7th grader, recorded an achievement level of 1 on the first statewide progress monitoring. It is important to remember that these progress monitoring assessments include items from the full range of the academic grade level. So these 7th graders in the first window of the school year are interacting with an assessment representing content from the full year's range of academic grade level standards. We also can see the scale score, in this case 299, and whether or not the student is meeting the standard for each of the 3 broad reporting categories comprised of several benchmarks. So for example, student A scored 299, which is an achievement level of 1 out of a possible high of 5. They were also below the standard for each of the 3 7th grade reporting categories for English language arts. An expanded view of the reporting category shows students' performance on items associated with specific benchmarks. Here is an example showing student H. I'm going to hover over student H right here. Student H scored 354 of the scale score, which represents a level 4 out of the 5 achievement levels. They were at or near the standard in the first reporting category, in this case, reading across genres and vocabulary. The expanded view shows whether or not the student scored an item correctly, as you can see here indicated by the ones, or it would be a 0 if they did not score it correctly, based on each benchmark represented at the top of this field over here. So item 2, 5, 6, and 12, for example. So while we can see in the second green box, this one right here, that item 2 was associated with the 7th grade ELA benchmark of 3.1, and that the student did answer it correctly, we do not know the specifics of that item and its relationship with the benchmark. The FAST assessments are a new inclusion in the statewide uniform assessment calendar, and the timeline for the calendar is presented here. An amendment announced on August 17th updated parts of the required reporting in the calendar and revised the 2022-2023 template was released by the state. Revisions were added, and the new calendar was presented to the Academic Services Review Committee and Superintendent's Cabinet prior to bringing it before you today. The briefing today will be in preparation for a September 20th board action item. The calendar template is provided by the Florida Department of Education and is populated with all statewide required information. Districts then are expected to add any relevant local information to complete the process. The first section defines technical terms used in the calendar, and the second section explains the use of any defined assessment. The third section reports assessments required by the state for all students, and the fourth section outlines required statewide assessments for certain subgroups of students. The fifth section includes any district-required assessments, and the sixth section includes estimates of total testing time by grade level. This is reported as statewide and district-wide minutes in order to ensure compliance with state statute requiring no more than 5% of student time be allocated for assessment. This slide presents the different types of assessments that would be reported in the uniform assessment calendar. Again, these would include both statewide assessments that are facilitated to all or some students, as well as any district assessments that either fulfill statewide requirements or are used for monitoring, intervention, and enrichment purposes. The next steps for the 2022-2023 uniform assessment calendar are presented here. It will be presented for approval at a school board action item meeting, and upon approval, will be posted to the district website and submitted to the Florida Department of Education. The agenda item includes a provision permitting the superintendent to make any adjustment necessary throughout the school year in response to new updates from the Florida Department of Education. This concludes the presentation. I will now defer to Dr. Bernier for superintendent's comments and for school board member questions and discussion.
Board members, first of all, to Dr. Matthew Kay, thank you for your work in this area. I appreciate you providing some additional information regarding how the new FAST test will provide additional student-by-student data at the classroom level for our teachers to help inform their instruction. So oftentimes we spend times talking about generalities of percentages across a grade level or of an entire school. This particular tool will help teachers be able to drill down to specific students, look at item analysis related to how students are testing on particular items and whether they're being successful, which gives and provides opportunities for reteach and other things. I will tell you that I think Dr. Kay will share with you upon direct questioning that he has been ultra inclusive of all the testing that might occur. We want to be as clear to the state as possible. Some other school districts across the state are not as diligent in reporting all of the testing minutes. So we wanted to make sure that we had a document that clearly reflected what the potential impact could be. So I do also want to remind everyone that the FAST assessment was the assessment that we did just a few weeks ago, where you got some reports from school buildings about the amount of time it was taking students to complete. As we got better, as our students got better, as our community of learners even improved, we're finding that the amount of time that was required on that first day of training is being shortened each time. The state has also been informed of statewide concerns related to the amount of time these tests are taking, and they are making some adjustments as well, but that's still to be determined in terms of what transpires moving forward. So I would turn it over for your questions and discussion related to our assessment calendars.
Okay, board members, any questions or comments? And thank you, Dr. Bernier, because you answered a couple of my questions with your comments.
Thank you.
Ms. Vaughn, then Ms. Gittens.
Thank you for the presentation. Are the FAST tests online practice tests?
There are practice materials for students. To answer the question, the tests themselves are administered online via computer platform, but there are practice materials as well for students to interact with.
Okay, but is there an actual, like College Board and a lot of different testing entities have actual full practice tests, or maybe abridged practice test? Is what's online in the format of a test that might have all the different benchmarks within it, or is it just practice material, like if somebody's having trouble with, I don't know, main idea or vocabulary? How does that look in the practice materials?
To answer the question, I'll have to get you more detail and more thorough answer, but there are practice materials, there are practice assessment items. It may vary depending on the grade level, and there are some different testing platforms. But there are items that students can interact with online. There are preparation materials. Whether or not it represents the full extent of all standards, I can't verify that at this moment, but I certainly can work and get that back to you.
Okay, well, were the teachers privy to this, or did we just kind of, and I know this is just practice at this point in field testing and that sort of thing, but did we kind of go in blind in terms of what the state was going to be presenting? I know, and I remember reading this, and Dr. Bernier just mentioned about the timing and all of that. It concerns me that the state just, here it is, and, let's see how you do.
Right. Well, to that, I can't,
Yeah.
Ms. Vaughn, I think I can answer those questions and take Dr. K sort of off the hot seat on those questions.
I didn't mean to put anybody on the hot seat.
Let me get to the first one. I think what you're asking, something familiar to me, is about AP exams and the library of exams that exist so that kids can go home and take multiple practice exams in order to be ready. New York State, for instance, has its Regents exams, so it's not unusual for a high school student to be sent home that says, take the 1965 U.S. History Regents tonight, and we'll look at your answers when you get back. The short answer to that question is no, our teachers and students do not have access to that type of database. This is a secured test. So it's not an area where they're given a full boat to fully prepare. They understand that if they teach their standards and they teach them appropriately and students have learned them, there'll be an opportunity for students to demonstrate their abilities to know and comprehend, and then through the examination of their ability to deal with the standards, to provide a score as to how a student is proceeding along those standards. Keep in mind that this first round of testing would have been, for instance, 5th grade, would have been set at the end of the 5th grade benchmarks, the end of the 5th grade standards. So it would not be surprising to find many of our students on their first round, since they're just entering 5th grade, not to be fully prepared in getting all level 3, 4s, and 5s and proficient scores. As to the other piece to the question, we were aware that FAST was going to roll out. We knew we had dates. Would we have liked some additional time and some additional windows with which to progress? Yes, it's one of the reasons why Matthew K. and Academic Services, actually, we suspended testing for a little while once we understood more about the unveiling of it, so that we could get schools even better prepared. So,
if I may, just to finish my train of thought on this, albeit it was totally different set of tests, but for a long time I taught a SAT, PSAT prep class. And with the College Board, over the many years that I taught that course, things really changed, like antonyms disappeared, and I mean, a lot of different things, the way the reading was done. But, and to me, this is the fair thing to do. So I'm not criticizing us. Surprise, I'm criticizing the way this was rolled out by the state. Good teaching is good teaching. And if you teach the kids critical reading and you teach them all the things that we know they need to have in as good readers and critical readers, yes, they will do well. But that said, the kids, no matter if I was teaching a reading class or a senior AP class, I always made sure I'd never drilled on tests. I don't believe in that. But I always made sure that we did do some practices, because it's important to the kids to know the format, to have, that's what's going to make a big difference. And if the teachers don't even really know the format, I'm just putting it out there for whoever's listening. I feel that that's really unfair, and it doesn't, even if it's not being used for anything that's going to reward us or punish us or anything in between, I think it's very short-sighted of the state to not provide practice materials that will allow teachers to familiarize their students with the format, because that's huge on kids being test takers.
I don't
and
think
that's
any-
the end of my thought process on that question.
I couldn't, in some extent, agree with you more. I think any diagnostician, any psychometrician, any testing coordinator would say that kids understanding how potentially the questions can be asked is vital for them to practice so that they can access the information, so they're not confused in itself by the question. That will come over time. As Dr. K has stated, there are practice materials. They're not clearly going to be the full exam or every item that the students will face. But as we become more familiar with how the state is asking, we will pass that along. Our teachers will have professional development in order to be better prepared, and then in turn prepare their students. But with secured tests, which are not new to the state of Florida, there is some difficulty in seeing the item specificity that you're asking for, and that you as an educator were so adept at helping your students understand this is the question, but let me tell you what they're really asking. We don't get that level of specificity on the actual FAST exams at this point.
Thank you. Ms. Gittens and Ms. Morgan.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm just a little bewildered on slide 4. If the purpose of this testing is to do progress monitoring, which is what we've heard consistently, that we're not doing one, all-in test, that we're doing progress monitoring. But like under what we know, the first one, the 3 progress monitoring assessments are intended to give periodic updates of student progress. But what we are still learning at the bottom is the indication of student progress towards benchmark proficiency. Am I confused, or we're doing this for progress monitoring, but we don't know how it's going to fit with proficiency? And yet we're doing these tests. And then if you want to answer that one first, and then I'll go to my next one.
Actually,
Yeah,
actually going to defer to Dr. K for that one.
sure.
Don't look so puzzled, right?
No, I think the point that you're making, I think, is a really important aspect of this whole process, is that while we find out on these assessments whether students are at or below or near the standard, when we look at the individual items themselves and they're associated with a particular benchmark, for example, 3.1, we may know what that benchmark is, but the way in which that item was presented to the student is still a bit unknown. We don't know what level of complexity that item was at. We don't know what level, or if there was stimuli associated. Was this a reading-based passage, or was this a word problem, or what level? And so there are still going to be aspects that are unknown when you get to this really specific aspect of benchmarks. That's not to say that there isn't anything indicating student proficiency on a broader level, or that there aren't important details within the reporting of the students. The reason why that particular clause was added was to just note that there are going to be some things still yet to be learned as we go through this full year of assessment. And as we continue going on, we're in this first window. We're continuing to learn more too, because our interaction with this platform has been relatively recent as well. This has been a very recent presentation to us from the state in terms of how that platform works out. So we're drilling down to that even today, looking around and saying, what can we learn from this? What can we glean?
So can you give me the kindergarten version of the difference between progress and proficiency?
So proficiency is a term used to determine, or to describe whether or not a student has met a sufficient level of learning defined by whatever the scale that might be. So
Compared to other students of the same
Correct.
age, et cetera, et
we
cetera.
tend to think of that in achievement levels. There's it's a 1 through 5, and a certain level is considered proficiency or achievement. Progress would be probably more akin to whether or not the student is improving in their learning. A student may not be proficient, but they may be making progress.
Okay, so, and thank you for that. On the next slide, 5, and that is for schools and teachers. The other one is more inclusive because it's students, schools, and teachers, am I correct?
Right.
Number 6?
Yeah, the next slide is simply if you were to, in this slide we're looking at now, if you were to click on an individual student, it would take you to the next slide. It would kind of drill down to the student level.
Okay, so one question has to do with where are we with teachers? I know we're not doing like the same thing as far as teachers highly effective and all of that. What is in its place? How do we define how well a teacher did? And are they going to just look at learning gains and in their progress, or how do we define that?
So what I'm hearing you ask, because that is somewhat of a, depending on the interpretation of that, it could be we're talking about something like the state accountability model, or we're just talking about internally as a district how we're measuring progress toward internal goals. So I'm not exactly sure.
More so the accountability of teachers.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, this year for the state, there are not going to be learning gains reported because there would be no prior assessment to tether it back to. So the only thing that would be reported will be things like proficiency or achievement. So what percentage of students were, 3, 4, or 5 out of test takers. So that will be what is going to be reported in terms of when we think of like school or district grades. That would be the kind of information that will be reported out.
So as a new teacher, what is my goal? Is my goal, of course, to move the kids along, but if I've got a plethora of level 1 and 2 students that are never going to reach 3, 4, and 5, what am I, and if I'm asking too deep, then I can get with you later, but I'm just trying to find out from the teacher's perspective, what's my goal?
It's a fair question. The goal is always, when we think about outcomes, right? When we think about inputs, outputs, and outcomes, our outcomes will always be proficiency. The goal is to drive as many of our students to the proficient level as possible. Sometimes that takes longer than a year's worth of instruction to accomplish, hence the idea of learning gains. If I'm not mistaken, and Dr. K will immediately correct me if I'm not, if I'm wrong, one of the necessary requirements to determine a learning gain is to know where a student has previously scored on an exam and then give it to them a second year. We've made these transitions in Florida before, all right? So on this monitoring progress, a goal would be for a teacher to take all of their students to proficiency if they can, right? But they will also get snapshots along the way of how that student is progressing against the standard. And you would see the red lines begin to diminish and the green and yellows begin to expand. So a teacher would see the impact of their teaching based upon how those graphs move each time the student is exposed to this assessment.
Okay.
Dr. K?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a fair point. The idea here would be you want to see progress
Right.
regardless of where your students came into you at. So you may have a group of students that come into you with some really, unfortunate deficiencies in their learning. They have not been meeting, historically the track we'd want them to see, or they haven't had the opportunity to demonstrate achievement, and others may have a very strong set of learners that come into them who have had a lot of background and just, benefits to learning. But both of those, you would want to see progress. What that looks like in terms of these reporting outcomes, it would vary by teacher. But I think to Dr. Bernier's point, we always want to see movement forward. It would be unique for everyone depending on their composition of students.
Right, and that was the main thing I wanted to get across, is without that, the other assessment of teachers, how do we compare a teacher that has 3, 4s, and 5s to a teacher that has 1s and 2s? And the 1s and 2s have learning gains. They may not be, as vast, but, I mean, there's pros and cons on each side, but how do we compare the two?
Right.
So that's
That's a very fair question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gittens. Mrs. Morgan, and then I'll come back to you, Ms. Vaughn.
I was at a SAC last night, and the question I was asked is, well, the comment that was made is we're doubling the testing. We're going from 3 progress monitoring to 6 progress monitoring. How is iReady different from the FAST? Why are we doing both? Kids are feeling stressed already. I know there's a rationale. I think it would be of great value to parents if that question were addressed in a parent communication, because I suspect that question is going to come up in every school.
We can certainly share it in that format. We have been sharing it with principals. We've been making sure that principals are aware, so an SAC or a PTO or a PTA should be able to garner the information from their principals, so academic services will work with that. It'll be so what I'm about to give is the answer. This is a difficult thing to write because there would be lots of questions related to it, and we'd want to deliver the instruction to check with your school, maybe with the testing coordinator and other things. What we have right now is our own progress monitoring, which has been fairly predictive of how a student would score on their benchmark, on their final exam, if you will, for the public, on their final test. What we need to do this year is we need to continue with the new state requirement of FAST, while continuing with, like, for instance, our iReady data, so that we can make some comparisons, because next year, if the state holds to its current regulation, all other outside benchmark opportunities other than FAST will be required to go away. So this is a year for us to study, and if you've spent any time with Dr. K at all, he's right on top of all of these issues. This is the only opportunity we have to look at what our iReady data is telling us compared to what FAST is telling us, so that we can make a decision of whether FAST is giving us that same data. So when we open the envelope at the end of the year, we can say that FAST was fairly predictive and correlated, maybe weakly, that's a strong statistical word I'm throwing out there, but correlated with our iReady, so that iReady can sunset and we can move forward with confidence in FAST that we're going to receive predictive scores that will tell us how a student will score at the very last exam, which will be the one that has stakes attached to it. Again, that's a very convoluted paragraph, and I'm glad I have a communications team.
Well, I will say that is sort of how I answered the question. that, basically we've been working along one path, we're introducing another one, we don't know what the difference is between the two, et cetera. I think that's really all you need to say to parents, that this is an interim step. And we recognize that, children are going to feel additionally stressed, and, we encourage, whatever you encourage parents to do at testing time. But I think we just need to say, this is what we have to do to transition if we're going to help your kids succeed. That's it.
Thank you.
Okay, and then,
Go ahead, Ashley.
okay, I'm going to have Ms. Giovanelli, Ms. Patrica, and then I'll come back to you, Ms. Vaughn. Thank you. Ms. Giovanelli.
Thank you. I know one of the concerns for parents is using the computer versus paper. Do any of the students have paper testing?
There might be, very rare, but I'm not aware of any paper-based testing accommodations this year. That's been pretty clearly sunset at this point.
But what happens when a student has a 504 or an IEP that needs the more time and paper? Then how do we do that?
I mean, at this point, that's something we're continuing to explore, but we do not have that option to utilize those paper-based. So we work with our alternative assessments department. We work with the state, but at this point, there's no accommodations for non-computer based.
Right, and that's an important clarification, and thank you for that, Matthew. As far as I know, that's our current condition. We will get that clarified for you, but let me be clear about other accommodations like extended time. Those accommodations still exist, and a student can have, if that's in their IEP, a student can have extended time in order to finish the exam.
Thank you.
We will get the aspect of, are there any circumstances under which paper could be utilized?
Well, we're continuing to learn as we get toward the accountability one for progress monitoring 3. There are room for accommodations that the states continue to inform us. We just got back from our state assessment meeting last week. Those will be things that we'll be further examining the extent to which accommodations can be made, but that'll be something as we get through the school year we'll learn more about and communicate well in advance. But I understood your question as being related to this current progress monitoring 1 window, and at this time there are no paper base for that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Patrica.
Thank you for being here. I'm looking at last year's calendar, and I'm seeing that the amount of testing, that to me is one of the easiest ways to communicate with parents about testing. When you can say to a parent, I know it feels like there's a lot of testing going on, but it's only 1.8% of the student's school year, that kind of helps to give them perspective. I'm looking at last year's compared to this year's. Can we put together, or do I have to put together a chart that shows where the increases are by grade? Number one. Number two, the information that's being sent to the state this year doesn't include percentages for grades 6 through 12. That would be useful for me for a reference to be able to talk to parents. I know that there are some increases in some grades and some decreases in other grades. And the pushback to us is always, well, it's not the state that's requiring all the testing, it's the district. And I'm seeing very little decrease in district testing time, which is leading to my brief assessment of these. I just pulled it up now. I haven't analyzed it. It seems like there's been very little decrease in district testing time. So I wonder why that is.
Again, the state is adding the FAST tests at several times during the year, including the last one, which is they say no stakes or low stakes test, but it is a high stakes exam. It will create proficiency levels. It will create lots of other data that the school district will be held accountable for. We have to utilize this year to look at the progress monitoring systems we've used to ensure that we can compare those to FAST and see where FAST is providing for us the inputs and the outputs so that we can be better predictive of our outcomes. But the short answer to your questions regarding percentages, numbers, comparison between last year and this year, we can pull that information together very quickly for you and provide it to the board.
So we had a difficult summer in terms of moving to the mainframe, or moving away from the mainframe, right? all of our wait lists disappeared in student assignment, and when I had parent pushback on that, I explained, this is a one-year thing. We had to do it in order to, become modern and have a computer system that supports us. Is it fair for me to say that this is a one-year thing, and we are reassessing or reevaluating the district assessments to take away what's not informative to our teachers?
Yes, there are some things on the testing schedule that I hope will never go away. I hope the opportunities to have a free SAT for every one of our students in high school, while it takes a significant amount of time, that we want to use class time in order to provide that across the socioeconomic community that varies greatly. So not all of the other assessments will go away, but the state has been very clear to district superintendents and to testing coordinators and other people, like in our directors of accountability, that there is an expectation that FAST will make and become the replacement for the other progress monitoring tools the districts have. They have given us basically a waiver for this year to look at what we have so that we can make sure and get a better understanding of how predictive this test will be for us as it relates to the final outcomes. Dr. K, anything to add?
No, I think that was a very thorough response, and I don't want to muddy it up with any further words.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Vaughn.
I just wanted to add something related to what Ms. Gittens said. I believe, unless this has changed, historically, if you have the upper level 4s and especially the level 5s, that it's actually more difficult to keep a level 5 at level 5. And so, it's a whole different ball game if you're teaching the lower level versus the higher level kids, because I think that's still true, isn't it? To keep them at, it's a harder lift.
Well, I mean, historically, our data shows, and state level data shows, that learning gains by the metric itself occur actually at a higher rate for level 3, 4, and 5 students, already proficient students. There is some volatility on the edges, for example, level 1A students tend to have high learning gains because there's only one direction to go. And so it's not a monolithic answer for every single grade level, every single thing, but there are several factors that can prove to be obstacles for growth. Part of it is the structure of it, and part of it is other just factors associated with the student learning experience. But the data show that learning gains occur at a higher rate for already proficient students.
Oh, okay. All right, my questions are we still doing, as we look at if a student is been level 1, level 2, are we still doing intensive reading as a requirement?
I would want to defer to our curriculum instruction on that one. I'm not privy to every single curriculum aspect for that,
okay.
but are you talking about the course itself or assessments related to it?
Well, it's been in the past, and it's been quite a few years since I've been out of the classroom, but at one time, if you were at a certain level, you were in, and it wasn't an option, you were in an intensive reading class as well as your regular ELA.
Yeah, I have my instincts on an answer, but I'm not the appropriate person to that one. Yeah.
Okay, because I'm approaching this on, well, what are we doing? What else are we doing to prepare our students to meet this? And I guess the other question, couple questions I had a question about our ELA students and at what point, are they involved with this, or how many years do they have to get involved with the FAST testing? Has that changed? And then the other thing that I was interested in it is more of a curriculum question, but I thought it kind of speaks to what we're talking about, because we're talking about how we're preparing our kids for this. And my own personal feeling is, although I am abundantly aware of what it means for schools and media reporting and all of that for the scores aren't the be-all, end-all. And when I was teaching reading, and it's been a few years ago now, and actually in the other test prep classes that I taught, there was a line. There was a line where it's helpful, the drill and this and that, and then all of a sudden, it kind of goes the other way. That's why I'm asking, is there intensive reading? Because kids, to me, personal view, I may be outmoded and old-fashioned with this, but I believe in authentic reading. I believe in, yes, yes, it's important to do all these things, and yes, we need to monitor, and yes, I'm not looking down on any of that, but there is a certain point where the kids just get bored and turned off with drill and this, and putting charts on the wall, who's rising in their understanding of themes or something like that. And what we've lost are authentic reading pieces, both fiction and nonfiction, that engage the students more. So at some point, I would like to have a discussion on that, on exactly, and I would like to see some of the material that's being used, and I do wonder if there's a way to measure where it is. I mean, I've seen it, and this is anecdotally, in the past, and I've seen it with my grandson going back a few years when he was in middle school, and he'd get better, and then all of a sudden it was like, ugh, not this again, and turn off. So again, I know it's anecdotal, but I think it would be an interesting conversation to have, and I surely would love to hear the teachers' take on what they observe in terms of improvement and then the plateaus. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, yes.
So Madam Chair, if you will, first and foremost, I think the request, when we think about inputs and outputs and outcomes, the board having a greater understanding of what we do at elementary, middle, and high school to intervene with students' ELA scores regarding their reading proficiencies would be incredibly important and valuable to everyone in this room, as well as to our community. So, Dr. Savage, as we prioritize your workshops that are forthcoming, we can add that, we can start developing something, and we can make sure that comes to you as quickly as possible. To answer your question, I think you said ELA, and I think you meant ELL. Our ELL...
What? I did. ELL, the ESOL, but I also mentioned the ELA, English Language Arts class, as opposed to the reading. So I did mention both.
Okay. So ELA students have a requirement to take the exam. They have to take it in English only. That has been an ongoing discussion at the state legislative platform for many boards across the state. Right now, there has been no movement into a test in their home language. So our students will continue to struggle online with a dictionary. And our goal, though, however, is like the young man who joined us at the board and then was also the Southwest Fort Myers young man that joined us at the board table and then joined us again on the 28th of July with our principals, talking about the difference we made in his life. I thought what he said to the principals was incredibly important because he talked about the personal commitment it took. And while some of his friends had the same abilities when they arrived, they didn't take full advantage. So we've been actually trying to stay in touch with him, continue to speak with him, trying to find out what those X factors are, for instance. And I think you raise a great point. Yes, intensive reading is still required. However, there's a balance to all of that. Intensive reading should be focused around the weakness or weaknesses of a particular student, whether that's sight words, fluency, phonemic awareness. So reading is a rocket science, and we should be pretty prescriptive, just like our doctors are when they hand us a prescription, that we should be working on the specific area of weakness and helping a student get better in that area. Because if we just treat the patient as a whole, we treat all the people who have a weakness in reading with the same prescription, you do get the drop-off that you're talking about. Then it becomes the authentic reading experience in the ELA, social studies, and other classrooms that balance both fiction and non-fictional text. You know, we do start to begin to read post-elementary school for content, right? We do move into content language, and then we move again into a lot of non-fiction examples. They're very technical passages that students have to potentially face as they move forward and they grow all the way through the 10th grade assessment. So it's a balance of both, and I too would love to see information and sort of a presentation to all of us and to our community as to what we're doing to intervene, but also what we're doing to create a reading experience that we know helps drive proficiency.
Thank you.
Ms. Gittens?
Okay, I have two quick questions. One, I didn't turn off, sorry. Okay. The first one, it's just interesting to me with the students with IEPs and accommodations that we can't honor those, like if they're supposed to have paper and pencil, that we can't do that at this time? Because it kind of says to me, does state law override federal, requirements for those students' needs?
We believe that at this point, with this first round of testing, that we had no paper and pencil option. That does not mean that that has not been addressed. We will get back with the board on a specific answer regarding paper and pencil accommodations.
Okay. The second thing had to do with your statement, and thank you for that, about learning gains are higher for already proficient students. That's been a back and forth kind of controversy for a while. Anyway, so my question has to do with the teachers that teach the higher level students, like advanced and AP. They have opportunities to get extra stipends, like when the students pass their AP exams and things like that. Is there anything, or are you thinking about anything in place for those teachers that work just as hard or more so at those lower level students, and they do make some learning gains, but there's no test for them to say, well, you had 10 students that pass this and you get so much money for each one of these? What is, or can there be something done for those at the other end?
I'll take that from Matthew, because he is a great person in accountability and assessment and research. What you're asking for is a human resources question. We can certainly look into what's available to us within the structural dollars we are provided. Remember, AP and some of the other exams are financed differently in terms of how those bonuses are awarded to teachers.
Right.
They don't necessarily flow through general fund. So I will make a note of that, certainly have that conversation with Mr. Dodig. I think that idea of potentially rewarding teachers based upon the number of students who reach or maintain proficiency could be an area that we could look into, but we'd have to negotiate that. We'd have to take a look at that with our unions.
And it may be, right, and it may be that some of the Title I funds or something like that at a school and make it school specific. I don't know, but I
don't think it can be Title I. Title I has very specific parameters
Right.
around it. But it could be school improvement dollars, and it could be school recognition dollars, although those tend to be spent more on bonuses and other things for teachers, or teachers to gain additional certifications. So we could take a look at it,
Okay.
but that's all I could promise at this point.
All
We'll
right,
examine it
I'd
as an option.
appreciate you looking at it, and thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments, board members? Okay. I want to thank my colleagues for asking the questions that I would have asked. And I want to thank Dr. Kay and Dr. Bernier for the explanations and for the presentation. And I look forward to future information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kay.
Okay. Then, next on the agenda is public comment. Attorney Dupree Bruno, please address the issue of public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It does not appear that we have anyone for public comment today.
Okay, then, no, is there anyone in the audience who did not fill in a card who has any comment? No, okay. Then, next on the agenda is board member comments and reports. So, I'll start with Ms. Giovanelli.
I really don't have anything other than, I received a pass for the game this Saturday at Lehigh, and I'm unable to attend because I'm going to a wedding. I don't know if everybody received one. If they didn't, I'm willing to give my parking pass and my pass away. And unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to attend, so I'll be curious how the game went. So I guess not. But anybody want my pass and parking pass, it's up for grabs. So, thanks. Okay.
Is that it?
Yeah,
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Patrica.
Yeah, I just have 3 things I want to highlight so that you don't have to listen to it tonight. Did you all see that we had a barber battle at Fort Myers Technical College? I thought that was awesome. Kind of like the taco thing, but for hair, I guess. Tacos and hair don't go very well together, but I was reminded of my tours of Fort Myers Tech and Cape Tech. When you walk into the, is it cosmetology section, all of those heads, and how freaky that is. And I also can feel completely out of my element when I walk in there because they all know hair and makeup and I don't. So I'm always very intimidated when I walk in there. Anyways, I thought that was a really neat thing to be doing and very creative or whatever. And you also all know how much I love wrestling. And our former wrestling coach at Mariner, Dave Phillips, was inducted into the National Wrestling Hall of Fame. And I believe that he coached at least one of the Minto brothers. The youngest Minto was in our board chambers last year receiving a recognition for being a state wrestling champion. And his brothers also went on to become very prolific wrestlers at the NCAA level. And the youngest Minto, I'm sure, will follow in their footsteps. Very, very talented young men, and I know that Mariner was always in really good shape with Coach Phillips at the helm. So really cool that he was inducted. And then finally, your staff, Dr. Bernier, provided us with an illustration for how we as parents can get into focus and see our kids' progress monitoring. It was wonderful. I was able to click right through and figure out what to do. I wonder what, if I may, through the chair, what we're doing to communicate that to parents so that they can also get in there. And then also, is there a way for us to put our ACE, AP, and IB test scores in focus so that parents like me don't have to track that information down through children who don't care as much as I do?
Second question first. I'm not sure. I'll have to get with Dwayne Alton and look at the programming of Focus. Remember, Focus is a piece of software. Sometimes our procedures have to change to meet the software, not the software to change to meet us. It's one thing that school districts do very, very well is they attempt to take a software developer's program and make it 4 inches shorter and 3 inches wider. When you buy a Corvette, it comes in certain colors and certain wheelbases. You can't make it shorter and longer, but I'll certainly check with our IT team to see whether that's possible. It would seem that it could either reside there or it could reside within Naviance. So it could reside somewhere for one-step shopping. And in terms of that, it was information that was sent out to you. It will be shared with parents. It will be sent out through open houses through our communications department. But the other thing that we're offering, and Mr. Ramirez and I were both at the Q the other day when we offered the opportunity for our teams to come back who work with Focus to help parents while their students may be in an after-school program or in some type of event. We could also be there helping support parents, not there, but in other locations as well, where we could help parents understand the power of Focus, how to get registered, how to get that computer program to alert you when there's certain things that are happening with your student. And again, those communication sheets and what was put together was very helpful. I wish I had had those when I was a parent. And we just need to make sure we're diligent about circulating those lots of different areas in lots of different ways.
So I'll tell you, 11 years I've been in this school district, and so I was able to look at 11 years of my youngest son's test scores when I went in there. And so when he comes to me and he says, I'm not smart enough to do this, all I have to do is show him that. and then he can see the color coding of his test scores and understand that he's more than capable of doing whatever it is he's struggling with, you know what I mean? So it's not, the visual piece of it is as helpful as having the information residing in one place. Those are my comments, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Jordan?
Okay, so I really don't have that many comments. I just really want to say, I really appreciate Dr. B being out there in the community. The community engagement, it has been really, I think, tremendous. I was able to attend the first one, and there were a lot of people who were there. And I know that there's many more to come, and people are really looking forward to having that, the dialogue and that conversation. So the community is speaking on that, and they're excited about what is coming forward. Let's see, what else? Well, and today, the Chamber of Commerce was here this morning and had an opportunity to stalk them all day. They came in and they had presentations. Dr. B probably will speak on some of that maybe. I know Dr. Malloy was in there speaking with them, so we had multiple people speaking. They viewed the different things that we have here in the district. They went to South Fort Myers High and seeing what we have to offer there as far as the academies. And then East Lehigh were the caterers of that event, which I was really excited because Allie and the other ones have moved on, and so we have new kids in charge. And they were just so excited to be there and to present and to speak on what they were doing. And the programming that he has developed is just, it's phenomenal. And he really has the students engaged in everything about what they do, from the back of the house to the front of the house, and making sure that their customers, whoever that may be, is taken care of, and they're out there speaking. So I just really appreciate Chef Phillips on that. And they keep offering Taco Tuesday, Ms. Giovanelli, that they have that at their cafe every Tuesday. And they're doing a lot of things actually at the cafe. The Rotary Club is going there. Kiwanis is meeting there. The sheriff is doing some things there now. So they are really building that up. But they did want me to remind everybody that they do have Taco Tuesday out there. So I told them I would absolutely share that. And that's it. We're just, I'm excited about where we're going. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jordan. Ms. Gittens?
I don't really have a lot. Working on some things that I can bring up at our next meeting that I want to share. For one thing, I don't know, Dr. Bernier, should I mention anything yet about our conversation today, or wait on that one? I can wait, because I'll ask you later. One of the things that I do want to mention, the selection of advisory board members. And I put something out on my social media in response to that. And basically, when I select, each of us have one, and the chair has 2 selections for most committees. And I select from those that are in my community. I feel that it's very, very important to do that. Otherwise, we end up with what we've had for some time, and that's a recycling of quite a few people. And then the statement is, well, they're experts in the field. And I still say there are plenty of experts out there if we look and welcome them in. And the only way we get better is to have different people and different thoughts and ideas from time to time. So I have been very attentive to having people within my zip code of District 5, rotating some of those people as well, and not, just, okay, they did well, let's leave them for 3 terms. I don't see that. I don't think that's what it's about. We have too many people in the county, Lee County, that we don't have to stay in one track. And I think when we start opening it up to different people will feel as that they can come. And I want to say to the public as well, though, fill out your application. It doesn't matter when, where, because there are people, there's movement throughout the year, movement throughout the terms. Some of the terms are 2 years. And make sure that you have an updated application on that site. There's not a deadline to putting that in, there's a deadline to choosing, but just to be out there. And I've mentioned this before, that I would like to see some way, shape, or form on the applications to have the district. And I've been shot down with it because people say, oh, well, what if they don't know their district? Well, they vote, and you know which area you vote in. So I think if they don't know it, it's something they can look up and learn. And if it says on there, District 5 or District 4, whatever, that would give us a better idea of selecting people from our community, which in my opinion is what the advisory committees are all about, is getting advice from all aspects and all areas of the community. So that's all I have right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Ms. Gittens. Ms. Vaughn?
Well, I'm so glad Ms. Gittens brought that up, because actually, over the weekend, I was reading and I did respond and answer a few questions on social media about that process, and people saying, well, I've applied but I haven't gotten chosen, or just various comments. So I'm really glad that she brought that up. It was on my mind and I didn't write it down, shame on me, so it would have escaped me. But I guess we're always coming up with new topics that we need to discuss. And just reading the various comments and thinking about these past almost 4 years and the people I've encountered on the various committees, and actually even before I was on the board, when I was a citizen member, there is a lot of recycling. And I don't want to say that that's a terrible thing, because it shows somebody that's really interested and wants to participate. But on the other hand, it seems like, there's some people that have been on a particular board forever. And that kind of skews the board a little bit, because people tend to defer to somebody who's been on the board for numerous years, and then it's easier for that person to be chosen as the chairperson of the board. So, and I know I may be off the board by the time this comes up, but I think it might behoove us at some point to talk about, first of all, should there be term limits? They get 2 year, 4 years on a particular board. To me, I would say that's enough. And if they're very interested, there are so many different, there are ad hoc committees and other things that come up where people can participate. So I think that might be something to look at. And for those, the single district members, districts 1 through 5, I think it's a great idea to try to select someone from your district. I mean, Ms. Morgan and I, all of you represent the whole county, but it's a little bit different. And I always try, frankly, on some of the committees, it seems like women are underrepresented, like construction and some of the other, and maybe finance, but maybe I'll look at a woman for a position, or look and see if there's a minority applicant that is otherwise qualified, I'm not going to pick somebody who's not qualified if it's one of those committees like, well, finance, where we've indicated that we would like some kind of financial background or some kind of financial expertise. But that might be something really to look at, because there seem to be more comments than I would have imagined on social media, feeling an unfair process, or I don't think it's an unfair process, but I think there are some things we can do to broaden the scope and have fewer recycled people on our committees. If somebody's been on the committee for 9 or 10 years, no, that's too much. The other thing, and through the chair, I wanted to ask Mrs. Dupree-Bruno something that I just saw last night, and you may or may not be up to date on this, but I was reading that there has been one Juul settlement, and it looked like it wasn't the one, it looked like, they said, I think, 36 states, and then at the end of that, in talking about, I forget, 460 million, I don't remember the amount, and then reading about the company, by the time, I don't think there's going to be a company by the time our lawsuit, because we are still in that, are we not? Do you know anything, any updates on how this, because then separately, it mentioned there are also many school districts, and it listed, so I'm assuming that's not our lawsuit, but ours is still out there to get $1.95 from the company when everybody's done suing them.
Through the chair, I can tell you that that is not our lawsuit.
Right,
That
okay.
was a lawsuit that was brought by multiple states through their Attorney General's office.
Okay.
Our lawsuit is still pending, and it is on my list of things to do to contact our outside counsel based on this, what happened yesterday. Last that we discussed, there were some test cases that we were still waiting to go through, and it was not going to be in our area. We were kind of long down the list. So that's all I can offer at this time. This just happened yesterday, so I will follow up the board and provide you with more information, but no, it is not our lawsuit.
Right, and I know I just sprang it on you because I was reading it actually pretty late last night, but the one thing that was very heartening from reading the article is that apparently the vaping, the whole Juul thing has lost popularity with kids. Apparently there's some other company that has some flavors and but again, from what I read, if there's anything left of that company by the time our lawsuit comes up, I'd be really surprised. But thank you for that, and those are my only comments.
Thank you, Ms. Vaughn. Mrs. Morgan?
Well, I want to thank staff for these board weekly updates, because I'm really learning a lot. I want to compliment the finance department for their small business enterprise program, their partnership with FGCU and another partner of FGCU's. So they say that there will be an MOU coming forward, and the district will be able to, they will help us administer a registration for small business enterprise certification process on behalf of the district. So I want to thank them for that. I want to acknowledge that 91% of the people who are in TAO, or 91% of the people who voted for the TAO contract approved it. I think that is notable. I also like the way that departments are complementing one another for helping each other. So, for example, department staff who assisted transportation services at multiple sites for pedestrian walking reviews, safety and security, who's assisting planning with the observation of parent pickups. You know, this is good stuff. I like to see people stepping outside their silo and recognizing that everybody has many people have some resources to share in the solution of a problem. So compliments to them. I really think it's cool that maintenance did talk about the fact that they did that off-site training when they last presented, but I want to compliment them again. I just think, you know, so often we worry about training the people who interact with the children in the classroom, everybody in the classroom, everybody in the school, but we don't talk about providing training for the custodians and everybody else. And, you know, we're a learning and growing community, and we should have the same focus for those people as we do for our teaching staff. And then finally, I want to thank Scott Cook and the Treeline Elementary SAC for inviting me to present on the November ballot resolution regarding the election or appointment of the school district superintendent. Very short presentation, couple of good questions. I'm waiting to hear from other principals in the East Zone. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to talk with faculty and SACs. So just a little push there. Anyway, those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Morgan. Okay, and I really have...
One other thing.
Oh, yes.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
You mentioned, or actually two of you talked about the advisory committee. I think that's something that we should discuss at the board reorg. When we have the new board, talk about our advisory committee structure. So that was my thought when you both spoke. Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
Okay, and Ms. Patrica?
Yeah, I wanted to add to that. I would have sworn, for the life of me, I cannot find it anywhere, but I would have sworn that one of the first things we're supposed to look at is appointing from our geographic area. That has always been what I've done. I've always looked at my geographic area first, and if there was no one qualified in that area, then I went outside the geographic area, but I can't find that written down anywhere, so I think it might be a figment of my imagination, but that's how I've always functioned with regard to that too. So just for the future, to have that discussion, I think is a good one.
I agree with that. And just thank you again to staff and students for leading us as we continue to grow and face changes and challenges, and you are appreciated. So, Mr. Pre-Bruno?
I don't have anything, thank you.
Okay, and then finally, last but not least, Dr. Bernier.
I was going to try to leave it a little bit alone, but I got asked to report a little bit about the Greater Fort Myers Chamber, so I'll be happy to do that. It was a great event today. They learned lots about our school district, including our CTA programs, potential proximity plans, and our plans for community engagement surrounding those particular issues. They spent some significant time with me, which was very nice of them. They were very accommodating, and they learned a great deal. Then they were off to South Fort Myers, and I did not stalk them there. I let them go, but just a really great opportunity for that organization, which has always come in before but has been missing the last couple of years due to COVID restrictions. Another great example for our community. There's a reminder that our schools and our buildings are open. If you've held meetings in the central office before, we have the space with which to accommodate you if our rooms are free and not being utilized for professional development. We would like to have those opportunities, and a great opportunity to really think about what a leadership Lee or a leadership school district of Lee County could look like, where we not only have visitation at the central office, but they go visit a school and we feed them school lunch and they get a breakdown from academic services. They go to the South Transportation Yard and they learn about our mechanics and our bus drivers, and we set up an obstacle course with them in a very safe area in the parking lot with cones and other things to give them a feel for what it's like to drive a bus. Empty, mind you, but what it's like to drive a bus. There's really great opportunities for us to educate our community, for them to learn, for instance, with transportation, that we transport over almost 45,000 students every day. We travel a community of 1,212 square miles. It's the size of Rhode Island. What our buses do on a daily basis is really an incredible opportunity for people to engage with some of our statistics. So really, really appreciated having time with them. I wanted to remind people about the town hall that comes up tomorrow night at San Carlos. Really looking forward to that. And a couple of quick dates, I'll save some other things depending on what all of you say tonight. But I wanted people to be aware that our college fair is still scheduled for September 19th. That'll be at FSW at the Sun Coast Credit Union Arena. That'll be from 6 to 8 p.m. So September 19th, College Fair, the Sun Coast Credit Union Arena, 6 to 8. And I wanted to remind people on September 27th is our upcoming vendor fair. So I wanted to make sure we had those members of the community who are interested in finding out how to bid on public jobs and to keep our money that we're spending on our school buildings and our renovation projects in this community. That would be an opportunity for you to come out and learn more about how that process works so we can spend money locally with our local businesses.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Ms. Gittens?
If I may have one more. I've gotten a couple of questions, this is basically to the superintendent, about how the locations for the town halls were selected. And I know that there are going to be some more in the future, but perhaps that could be emphasized and let people know that we're not just going to be in certain areas, so that's...
We chose school buildings that haven't primarily been used for things like this. We were really picking on some school buildings in some communities that have not really hosted superintendents in the past. It's the same way I picked some of the other avenues and where I began my school visitations and some of the other things that I've chosen to do. I keep ready lists. For instance, I know exactly which graduations I went to this past year. I will be at very different graduations this coming year because it's important for the superintendent to spread out across this community. So as we look towards additional community engagement opportunities, we will continue to look both in the east, south, and west zones, trying to ensure that we've spread out and made myself and my staff available as possible to locations in our communities.
And can a community, or let's say a group of people, request a town hall?
Currently, we could certainly make the request. I would never turn down the ability to make a request, but I think we have to look at the overall schedule and what I'm trying to accomplish for all of you before November 1st in my evaluation. We're on a very tight schedule, not only for community engagement, but we're also on a very tight schedule for our neighborhood dialogues, which will revolve around proximity and schools enrollment and transportation, which will lead into November and December with some recommendations to the board in January and February about a potential path forward regarding our transportation system. So I would take any and all requests, and if they can be accommodated, I would do everything to make sure that that could happen.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll return here at 5:05 for our special budget meeting, followed at 6 o'clock by our action meeting. And at this time, seeing no further business and hearing no objections.
We also have Dunbar coming in after the, Dunbar High School will be here as well. They come in after the 5:05.
Oh, okay, that wasn't on my calendar, but, okay, and we'll have a student performance from Dunbar High School, which is going to be the highlight of the evening. Thank you. Okay, and now this meeting is adjourned.